The message came on a Tuesday morning when John Morrison was eating breakfast in his small apartment on Colony 7. He was 53 years old, and he had spent most of his life building things that help people live better lives on distant worlds. Water treatment plants and sewage systems and irrigation networks. The kind of work that nobody noticed until it stopped working. The message appeared on every screen in the colony at the same time, and it said the same thing in 12 different languages. Humanity was being summoned to answer for its existence before the Galactic Council. John put down his coffee and read the message 3 times because he could not believe what he was seeing. The Galactic Council had existed for 12 million years, according to everything humanity knew about the wider universe, and it was made up of over 4,000 different species from across the galaxy, and it had rules and laws that governed how civilizations interacted with each other. Humanity had only been part of this larger community for about 300 years, and in that time, they had tried their best to be good neighbors and to learn the ways of the older species. But now the Council was saying that humanity had committed something called an inheritance violation, and that a single representative must come to Station Eternity to speak for the entire species. The punishment for this violation could include something the message called archival, which John later learned meant the complete destruction of a species with only genetic samples kept in storage. Every human ship in the galaxy was being held in place by Council authority, and every human colony was being watched by Council observers, and there would be no escape and no negotiation until the trial was complete. John watched the news feeds for 3 days as the governments of Earth and the colonies argued about what to do. No one wanted to go. The politicians said it was too dangerous and that someone else should take the risk, and the military leaders said the same thing, and the scientists said they needed more time to study the situation. John thought about his daughter Emma, who lived on a colony called Kepler with her family, and he thought about his grandchildren, who he had only seen through video calls, and he thought about all the ordinary people on all the human worlds who were just trying to live their lives. Someone had to go and speak for them. Someone had to stand in front of the Council and try to explain that humanity was not a threat. On the 4th day, John sent a message to the Council representative who had been assigned to oversee Colony 7, and he said that he would go. The representative was a being called a Veth, and it looked like a cloud of geometric shapes that kept folding in on themselves, and it made John feel dizzy to look at it directly. The Veth asked John if he understood what he was volunteering for, and John said yes. The Veth asked if John was a leader among his people, and John said no, he was just an engineer. The Veth was silent for a long moment, and then it said that John's offer was accepted and that a ship would come for him in the morning. John did not sleep that night. He recorded a message for Emma and told her that he loved her and that he was proud of the woman she had become, and that he was doing this because someone had to do it, and he could not ask anyone else to take the risk. He packed a small bag with some clothes and some pictures of his family and a book that his wife had given him before she died 10 years ago. And the morning the ship came, and it was unlike anything John had ever seen before, and it was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and it made the human ships he had traveled on look like toys. The journey to Station Eternity took 3 weeks, and during that time, John tried to learn everything he could about the Council and its history and the species that made up its membership. He learned that the Council had been founded by 7 ancient species who had grown tired of war and destruction, and who wanted to create a system that would allow civilizations to coexist in peace. He learned that over the millions of years since then, the Council had grown and changed, and that it had developed rules for how new species should be treated, and what behaviors were acceptable and what behaviors were not. Learned that 17 species had been archived in the history of the Council, and that each of them had been found guilty of being too dangerous to allow to continue existing. John wondered if humanity would be number 18 station Eternity appeared on the view screens on the 21st day of the journey, and John felt his breath catch in his throat. It was not a station in any way that humans understood the word. It was a structure that wrapped around a small star and drew power from it, and it was so large that John could not see the edges of it, even when the ship was close enough to dock. The docking bay alone was bigger than most human cities, and it was filled with ships of every shape and size and color, and John saw vessels that looked like living creatures, and vessels that looked like abstract art, and vessels that seemed to exist in more dimensions than he could perceive. When the ship landed and the doors opened, John stood at the top of the ramp and looked out at the crowds of alien beings that had gathered to see him. He was wearing his work clothes because no one had thought to give him anything formal, and he was carrying his small bag, and he was alone. Thousands of eyes turned toward him, and he saw curiosity and fear and hatred and confusion in those eyes, and he knew that for most of these beings, he was the first human they had ever seen in person. John took a deep breath, and he thought about Emma and his grandchildren and all the people he was trying to protect. Then he walked down the ramp and into the crowd, and he kept walking toward the great hall where the council was waiting for him. The aliens parted before him like water flowing around a stone, and none of them touched him, and none of them spoke to him, and the silence was so heavy that John could hear his own heartbeat. He walked for what felt like hours through corridors that shifted and changed around him, and past windows that looked out on impossible vistas, and beside beings that defied his understanding of what life could be. And finally, he reached the doors of the great hall, and they were so tall that he could not see the top of them, and they were covered in symbols from thousands of different languages. The doors opened slowly and light poured out, and John Morrison walked through them alone. The stars watched in silence as the fate of humanity began to unfold. The great hall of the Galactic Council was not like any room John had ever seen before. It was a sphere made of living crystal that stretched 3 kilometers in every direction, and gravity worked differently here so that representatives could stand on every surface of the sphere, and all of them could see the center where John now stood. John was on a platform made of pure light, and he could feel it humming beneath his feet, and he tried not to think about what would happen if the light suddenly went away. Around him, in every direction, were the representatives of over 4,000 spacefaring civilizations, and they were watching him with eyes and sensors and organs that John could not even begin to understand. Some of them were small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, and some of them were so large that they filled entire sections of the sphere, and some of them did not seem to have physical bodies at all. The translation device that had been placed behind his ear began to hum, and then a voice spoke that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the voice of the Vothkai Arbiter, and it was the being that would lead the trial against humanity. The Arbiter was a creature of folded geometry that hurt to look at directly, and it hung in the air above John like a storm cloud made of mathematics. Species 7841, the Arbiter said. Designation human. You stand accused of inheritance violation. John waited because he had learned that it was better to listen than to speak when you did not understand what was happening. Your species carries genetic markers of the precursors, the Arbiter continued. The builders. The first ones who seeded this galaxy with life 4 billion years ago and then departed for reasons unknown. You are their direct inheritors, and you have hidden this from the Council. John heard sounds rippling through the chamber, and he realized that it was the sound of 4,000 species reacting to this news. He saw fear on faces that he could read, and he saw hatred, and he saw something that might have been awe. We did not know, John said, and his voice sounded very small in that vast space. Ignorance is not a defense, the Arbiter replied. The precursor bloodline carries with it certain capabilities that make inheritor species extremely dangerous. Your species has already demonstrated several of these capabilities. The Arbiter's form shifted and images appeared in the air around John. He saw pictures of humans surviving disasters that should have killed them, and he saw pictures of humans adapting to environments that should have been impossible, and he saw pictures of humans forming bonds with alien species in ways that the Council had never seen before. You adapt to any environment, the Arbiter said. You bond with other species, as if you were designed to do so. You innovate at rates that should be impossible for a species of your age, and you persist through challenges that would have ended any other civilization. John thought about human history, and he thought about all the times that his species had come close to extinction and had somehow found a way to survive. He thought about the ice ages and the plagues and the wars and the famines, and he thought about how humans had always found a way to keep going. We have studied your history in great detail, the Arbiter continued, and we have found it deeply troubling. No species should be able to survive what yours has survived. No species should be able to grow as fast as yours has grown. No species should be able to connect with others as easily as yours does. The Arbiter's geometry became sharper and more aggressive. The Council must decide what to do with you. Are you a dormant weapon left behind by the Builders? Are you a threat that must be contained or eliminated before you become too powerful to stop? These are the questions that will be answered by this trial. John looked around the chamber, all the beings who were watching him, and he realized that they were afraid. These civilizations had existed for millions of years, and they had built wonders that John could not even imagine. And they had traveled between the stars when humanity was still learning to make fire, and they were afraid of a species that had only left its homeworld 300 years ago. Can I ask a question? John said. The chamber fell silent, and the Arbiter's form flickered with what might have been surprise. You may. What happened to the other inheritors? John asked. We cannot be the only species that carried the precursor genetic markers. There must have been others before us. The silence in the chamber became heavier, and John saw beings looking away from him, and he saw others shifting uncomfortably, and he knew that he had touched on something that the Council did not want to discuss. There were 17 inheritor species discovered over the last 12 million years. The Arbiter said finally. All of them were deemed to be threats to galactic stability. All of them were archived. John felt cold inside, but he did not let it show on his face. Archived. He repeated. You mean destroyed. Their genetic material was preserved, and their cultural records were stored, and their physical forms were ended. This is the standard procedure for species that pose an unacceptable threat to the Council and its members. John nodded slowly, and he thought about 17 entire civilizations that had been wiped out because they carried something in there. Blood that they had never asked for and had never known about. So you are wondering if we are going to be number 18, John said. The Arbiter did not respond, but the silence in the chamber was answer enough. John looked up at the geometric being that held the power of life and death over his entire species, and he felt something stir inside him. It was not fear, and it was not anger. It was determination. Then let the trial begin, John said, and let me show you what humanity really is. The trial lasted 47 days, and during that time John learned more about his species than he had ever known. Before representatives from dozens of civilizations came forward to present evidence, and John listened to all of it, and sometimes he was proud, and sometimes he was ashamed, and sometimes he was simply amazed. He heard about how humans had survived a supervolcanic eruption 70,000 years ago that had reduced the population to fewer than 10,000 individuals, and how they had somehow recovered and spread across the entire planet. Heard about how humans had developed language and art and music and mathematics, and how they had done all of this faster than any other species the Council had ever observed. He heard about how humans had split the atom and developed weapons that could destroy their entire world, and how they had somehow managed not to use those weapons even when they were angry and afraid. He heard about how humans had reached the stars 300 years ago, and how they had encountered 17 different alien species since then, and how they had formed genuine friendships with all of them. That last point seemed to disturb the council more than anything else. The Drexy are a hive mind species, the Arbiter said on the 32nd day of the trial. They do not form individual bonds. They do not have the concept of friendship as other species understand it. And yet your daughter Emma Morrison is listed as having a Drexy companion. Explain this. John thought about the messages his daughter had sent him over the years, and he thought about the strange clicking sounds she had learned to make, and he thought about the small piece of Drexy biomatter that she wore around her neck so that she could stay connected to her friend across light years. Humans are adaptable, John said. We do not see differences as barriers. We see them as bridges. When my daughter met the Drexy, she did not try to make them more human. She tried to understand how they experienced the world, and she found a way to connect with them on their own terms. This is precisely what concerns us, the Arbiter replied. You integrate. You persist. You adapt. Given enough time, you could become anything. You could become everything. John stood alone on that platform of light, and he looked around at the thousands of beings who were deciding the fate of his people, and he made a choice. He chose to tell the truth. You are right, he said. The chamber erupted in noise, and it took several minutes for the Arbiter to restore order. You admit that humanity is dangerous? The Arbiter asked. I admit that humanity could become dangerous, John said. We could become a threat. We could become a weapon. We could become a plague that consumes this galaxy. That is what you are afraid of, and I understand your fear. He paused and took a breath. You have watched species rise and fall for millions of years. You have seen civilizations destroy themselves and destroy each other. You have learned to recognize danger before it becomes too powerful to stop. And now you look at us and you see all the signs that have come before. John's voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding. But you have forgotten something important. The precursors did not leave weapons behind. They left children. And children are not born knowing what they will become. They are shaped by the world around them, by the people who raise them, by the choices they are given. He looked directly at the Arbiter. You have killed 17 inheritor species. 17 civilizations that carried the same genetic markers that we carry. And you never gave any of them a chance to become something other than what you feared. You saw the potential for danger, and you destroyed them before that potential could become real. The chamber was completely silent now, and now you wonder why the builders never came back. Why they left this galaxy and never returned to see what their children had become. John raised his voice so that everyone could hear him clearly. Maybe they were waiting. Maybe they wanted to see what kind of galaxy they had left behind. Maybe they wanted to see if their children would be welcomed or destroyed. He spread his arms wide. You have a choice to make. Not just about humanity, but about what kind of council you want to be. Do you want to be a blade that cuts down anything that might become dangerous? Or do you want to be a hand that reaches out and offers guidance? He lowered his arms. We are young. We are small. We are fragile. And we have made terrible mistakes in our history. But we have also built beautiful things. We have loved each other. We have reached for the stars. And we have tried to be better than we were. John's voice softened. Give us the chance to show you what we can become. Not because we have earned it, but because we have not yet had the opportunity to earn it. Let us prove that the precursors were right to leave children behind in this galaxy. The Arbiter's geometry was completely still, and if we fail, John continued, if we become the monsters you fear, Then you will have every right to stop us. But at least you will know that you gave us the choice. At least you will know that you tried something different." He looked around the chamber one last time. "That is all I have to say." The silence stretched on for a very long time, and John stood alone in the center of the great hall and waited for the judgment that would decide the fate of his people. The council deliberated for 6 days after John finished speaking. During that time, he was kept in a small room with a window that looked out on a nebula, and the colors of the nebula changed slowly from blue to purple to red as the hours passed. John did not sleep well, and when he did sleep, he dreamed of his daughter and his grandchildren and his wife who had died 10 years ago, and all the people on all the human worlds who were waiting to find out if they would live or die. He thought about the 17 species that had been archived before humanity, and he wondered what they'd been like and what they might have become if they had been given the chance. He thought about the precursors who had seeded life across the galaxy 4 billion years ago, and he wondered why they had left and where they had gone, and if they were still out there somewhere, watching to see what would happen on the 6th day. The door to his room opened, and the Vethkai arbiter floated inside. "The vote is complete." The arbiter said, "You will return to the great hall to hear the result." John stood up slowly, and his body ached from sitting still for so long, and he felt older than he had ever felt before. He walked back through the corridors of Station Eternity. And this time, the aliens did not part before him like water, because this time there were no aliens in the corridors at all. Everyone was already in the great hall waiting to hear the verdict. When John stepped onto the platform of light, he saw that the chamber was completely full, and every representative was watching him with absolute attention. The arbiter took its place above him, and its geometry was sharper than John had ever seen it before. Species 7841. The arbiter announced, "Designation human. The council has voted on your fate." John stood straight and waited. 2,847 representatives voted in favor of archival. John felt his heart sink. 1,156 representatives voted in favor of containment. That was not as bad as archival, but it still meant the end of human freedom. 12 representatives voted in favor of full integration with council membership. 12 out of more than 4,000. John thought, that was almost nothing. And the remaining votes, the arbiter continued. John looked up because he had not expected there to be any remaining votes. 1,412 representatives chose not to vote. The chamber was silent, and John could feel the confusion and surprise coming from the beings around him. "What does that mean?" John asked. The arbiter's form shifted in a way that John had learned to recognize as uncertainty. "It means that the council is divided. It means that the required majority for action has not been reached. It means that for the first time in 4 million years, a verdict cannot be rendered because too many representatives refuse to participate." John felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. "So what happens now?" Before the arbiter could answer, a new voice spoke from the upper tiers of the chamber. It was a voice that sounded like wind moving through ancient trees, and it came from a being that John had noticed but never heard speak during the entire trial. The Morrison were one of the founding species of the council, and they were so old that they had been ancient when most other civilizations were still young, and they rarely spoke because they had seen so much that words seemed inadequate to express their thoughts. "It means," the Morrison representative said, "that some of us are tired of being afraid." The chamber remained silent as the ancient being continued. "It means that some of us remember what it was like before the council became a blade instead of a hand. It means that some of us have listened to this human speak, and we have recognized something that we had forgotten." The Morrison moved slowly down from the upper tiers until it was level with the platform where John stood. "I have lived for 9 million years, the Morrison said. "I have watched empires rise and fall. I have seen stars born and die. I have voted to archive species because I believed it was necessary for the safety of the galaxy. The ancient being turned to face the rest of the council. But I did not vote this time, and neither did more than 1,000 others. Because we heard something in this human's words that we have not heard in a very long time. What did you hear? John asked. The Morrison turned back to him. Hope, it said. You spoke of children and choices and the possibility of becoming something better. You did not beg for your life, or threaten us with war, or try to convince us that you were harmless. You simply asked us to give you the chance to prove what you could become. The Morrison made a sound that might have been a sigh. We have been killing children for 12 million years because we were afraid of what they might become. And I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of choosing death when we could choose life. The Arbiter's geometry folded and twisted. This is unprecedented. The council must reach a verdict. We cannot simply ignore the accusation. Then we must deliberate. Further, the Morrison said, or we must find a new way to handle this situation. But I will not vote for archival, and I will not vote for containment. And if that means we must wait until we find another path, then I am willing to wait. Other voices began to speak from around the chamber, beings who had abstained from the vote now coming forward to express their agreement with the Morrison. John watched as the oldest and most respected members of the council declared that they would not participate in the destruction of another inheritor species, and for the first time since he had arrived at Station Eternity, John allowed himself to believe that humanity might survive. The debates continued for another 3 weeks, but John knew that the outcome had already been decided in the moment when the Morrison had spoken. More and more representatives came forward to declare that they would not vote for archival or containment. And eventually, the faction that wanted to destroy humanity found itself without enough support to take any action at all. The council reached a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but that everyone could accept humanity would be placed under observation for 100 years, and during that time, council observers would live among humans and study their behavior and report back to the council on what they found. If at the end of that 100 years humanity had proven itself to be a council on what they found, if at the end of that 100 years humanity had proven itself to be peaceful and constructive member of galactic civilization, then full membership in the council would be granted. If humanity proved to be dangerous, then the council would reconsider the question of archival. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat either. It was a chance, and that was more than the 17 previous inheritor species had ever been given. John Morrison returned to Earth on a ship that was not his own. The Morrison had offered to transport him, and 12 other species had offered as well. Beings who had abstained from the vote and who wanted to see humanity's homeworld for themselves. They wanted to understand how such a young species had produced someone like John, someone who could stand alone before the judgment of the galaxy and speak with conviction about hope and children and choices when the ship entered the solar system. John stood at the observation window and looked at the sun that had warmed his ancestors for millions of years. When the ship passed Mars, he saw the red deserts where humans were building new cities and new dreams. When the ship approached Earth, he saw the blue oceans and the green continents and the lights of human civilization sparkling on the night side of the planet. It was home, and he had never appreciated how beautiful it was until he had almost lost it forever. The ship landed at a spaceport in what used to be called Europe, and there were crowds of people waiting to see the man who had spoken for humanity before the council. But John did not care about the crowds or the cameras or the politicians who wanted to shake his hand. He only cared about one person. Emma was waiting at the edge of the landing field with her Drexy companion clicking softly beside her, and when John walked down the ramp, she ran to him and threw her arms around him, held his daughter, and he felt tears running down his face, and he did not care who saw them. "I was so scared," Emma said. "I thought I would never see you again." I know, John said. I was scared too. The Drexy made a sound that the translation device interpreted as something like joy at reunion, and John reached out and touched the being that had become part of his daughter's family. Thank you for taking care of her, he said. The Drexy clicked in response, and Emma laughed through her tears. It says that you are a good father and that it is honored to know you. John smiled and looked up at the sky where the Morris ship was still visible as a dark shape against the clouds. Morris representative had asked to speak with John before they parted, and John had agreed now. The ancient being descended from the ship on a platform of light and approached the place where John stood with his daughter. Why did you really abstain? John asked. You said it was because you heard hope in my words, but I think there was something more. The Morris was silent for a long moment, and its body shifted in ways that suggested deep thought. Because the builders left a message, it said. Finally, a message carved into the quantum structure of space itself. Readable only by those old enough to remember how to read it, we have kept this message secret for 8 billion years. John felt a chill run down his spine. What did the message say? The Morith turned its ancient eyes toward the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening blue. It said, "Wait for them. They will be small and fragile and afraid. They will make terrible mistakes, but they will also build bridges where others see only walls. And when they finally reach you, welcome them home." John stared at the Morith, and he felt something shift inside him. Something that he could not name, but that felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. You think we are the ones the message was talking about? I do not know, the Morris said. The message did not give a name or a description. It simply told us to wait and to watch and to welcome the children when they arrived. The ancient being made a sound that might have been a laugh. We have been waiting for 8 billion years, and we have killed 17 species that might have been the ones the message spoke of. We were so afraid of what the children might become that we forgot to give them the chance to become anything at all. The Morith looked at John with eyes that had seen the birth of stars. But you reminded us, you stood alone before the judgment of the galaxy, and you asked us to choose hope instead of fear. And enough of us listened. Enough of us remembered why we founded the council in the first place. John did not know what to say, so he simply nodded. The 100 years of observation will pass quickly, the Morris said. Use that time well. Show us that the builders were right to leave children behind in this galaxy. Show us that hope is stronger than fear. The ancient being turned and began to ascend back to its ship. And John Morrison, it said, without looking back. The stars are no longer watching in silence. They are watching with hope. Do not disappoint them. John watched the Morris ship rise into the sky and disappear among the stars that were now shining brightly overhead. Thought about the precursors who had seeded life across the galaxy and then left. Waiting for their children to grow, he thought about the 17 species who had been destroyed because the council was afraid of what they might become. He thought about all the humans on all the worlds who now had a chance to prove themselves worthy of the gift they had been given. And he thought about the message that had been waiting for 8 billion years. Welcome them home. John put his arm around his daughter, and together they walked away from the spaceport and into a future that was no longer certain but was at least possible above them. The stars burned cold and eternal, but now their silence was not empty. It was full of hope and expectation and the quiet promise that somewhere out there the builders were watching, waiting to see what their children would become. And for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy held its breath, not in fear, but in wonder, because humanity had been given a chance, and John Morrison knew that his people would not waste it.